Our country can rightly be called an empire. And it's not some metaphor. We sincerely believe that the Russian Empire, although in a somewhat reduced form, but continues to exist, develop and is not going to collapse, despite the intrigues of ill-wishers. Look at our territory. Look at the number of diverse peoples living on the territory of Russia, and you will realize that you and I were able to preserve our common empire, only not the empire of evil, as the Soviet Union was called, and as the ill-wishers began to call Russia again, but the empire of justice or the empire of good. Because, first of all, we built our country on the principles of justice. The state-forming people never exploited and oppressed other peoples of Russia, did not impose their religion on them, did not eradicate their languages and culture, did not arrange ghettos for them like those created in the United States by the Anglo-Saxons for the Indians, did not get dirty with the slave trade and colonization, as Europeans got dirty in all this. And secondly, we have fought every injustice for centuries and racism and colonialism. And now let's answer the question why our empire causes such an obsessive desire of Western partners to collapse it, and this desire stretches from century to century. This is not because they were not satisfied with our system, not because they were afraid of our ideology, and not because they did not like Russians. No. Yes, of course, they always considered themselves superior to us, more civilized or something, and treated us somewhat contemptuously. You can't take that away from them. As it seems to us, the main reason for their desire to tear our empire to pieces is that they have not given and do not give a rest to the fact that 1.55 of the population of the earth, Russians, who are as if inferior to them by definition, still own 1.6 part of the land where there is a huge amount of fresh water, forests, fertile land and a variety of resources. So it is elementary envy and the same desire to take and divide everything. That's why our people had to invent various armaments for centuries, which no one else has, and to spend a lot of money not for their own well-being, but for the maintenance of the army and navy, so that the robbers from the big road would not even think of trying to take something from us by force. And so in the 90s the Western partners had a chance to achieve by cunning what they could not achieve by force. So they decided to tear our country apart first, and then take it over piece by piece. Despite the fact that Russia was no longer a communist country and their ideological adversary, but became democratic, fully integrated into their financial and economic system, paid them their due tax and did not hinder their geopolitical plans in the 90s, they began to support and nurture nationalism and separatism in our national republics. And even in Russian regions, trying to indoctrinate people into thinking that they are not Russians at all, but some kind of Siberians. As the president said, they wanted to finish us off, and he doesn't understand why they did it. I think it's pretty clear. The principle of divide and conquer has never been abolished. They realized that sooner or later Russia would begin to revive again like the phoenix bird, and tried to use the moment to weaken it as much as possible and fragment it. Fortunately, it didn't work out for them. God has once again saved our country from a great misfortune. The collapse and subsequent armed conflicts, all with all for resources, fresh water and land, which would be fueled from the West, by all sorts of sirs, peers, gurs and monsieur etc. And remember how we could barely contain our indignation when our diplomats and president, as it seemed to us then, fawned before the West in the United States, always speaking politely and obsequiously to them, calling them partners. Yes, our authorities at that time wanted peaceful coexistence, that's why we talked to them like that, despite their obvious arrogance, despite the fact that they behaved like masters and rulers of the world. And they had a great chance to strangle us in their arms then, but they didn't have time to get their hands on us in the 90s and got very nervous when a strong politician came to power and then stayed in power, thwarting their plans, Putin. He simply began to dismantle all their colonial financial and economic schemes with which they had entangled our country and consistently restore all kinds of sovereignty. At the moment, we have practically restored all types of sovereignty, except for technological sovereignty, but we are now actively engaged in restoring it, conducting import substitution and investing in the development of science. The government has set a task to achieve full technological sovereignty of the country, and it will be fulfilled, there is no doubt about it, because the scientific and engineering potential of our people is enormous. But back to the topic. So, when it became clear to Putin that the West does not consider us equal partners, but its obedient colony, he began to counteract this state of affairs, first gently warning them in Munich in 2007 that we do not agree that there is one suzerain in the world, the master, and all other countries, servants must obey him and carry out any commands. That's when Hegemon realized that not only Russia's resources had once again sailed out of his hands, but also felt a clear threat to his dominance. That's when an all-out information war was launched against Putin, both internationally and domestically. They began to call the president nothing but an authoritarian leader, and his power, a regime, and the main goal for them was his overthrow and bringing to power a pocket pro-Western opposition. First, it was manifested in 2008, when all the world media were blowing the same horn that Russia attacked poor Georgia, and of course it was Putin, not Medvedev, who did it, because they presented everything in such a way that Prime Minister Putin is in charge of the country, not President Medvedev. And then the Anglo-Saxon Empire, which also continues to exist, got involved in this information war, to the fullest, when Putin came back to power, because in addition to envy and the desire to take away our resources, they have a fear that their well-organized colonial world may come to an end. But beyond the informational one, a sanctions war has been waged. It started with the passage of the Magnitsky Act in 2012, when Crimea was out of the question. You yourself probably remember very well how their propaganda machine worked, accusing our country of poisoning the Skripals, of supporting terrorism, that is, Bashar al-Assad, who allegedly used chemical weapons, of violating various treaties that they themselves violated, of undermining the northern streams that they themselves undermined, and much more. I can't list it all. And now they have gotten to the point that Russia is going to take over Europe and have started calling our country the evil empire again, similar to the Soviet Union. Our diplomats and president tolerated them for a long time and called them nothing but our partners, voiced concerns and only that caused irritation of our people, a kind of ingratiating peacefulness. Finally, in 2021, the rhetoric of our diplomats and the president began to change. They started calling things by their proper names, without politeness. And recently, the masks were dropped for good. The president began to call the system created by the West by the term that best suits it, neocolonialism. He pointed out that all developing countries have to pay a kind of tax to the West and have to obey it in everything. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, from the podium of the UN, called the West what it is now, an empire of lies. Well, the other day at the Valdai Forum, Vladimir Putin finally uttered the main phrase that I have been waiting to hear for years. When Western partners humiliated us, judged us, tried to get democracies and force us to do their will. To quote Putin, all the time we hear, all the time it sounds, you must, we are seriously warning you. Who the hell are you people? What right do you have to warn anyone? Wipe your eyes, the era of colonialism is over and will never come back. Never. Which means the Russian Empire is back. And our empire is truly evil. Very angry at the empire of lies.